4 hours. That's the lie they're selling you. 4 hours to save 40,000 American lives scattered across bases that were never designed for what's hitting them now. But here's what nobody's telling you about those 4 hours, and here's what I've been tracking that should terrify every family with someone deployed in that region right now. I'm Kane Shimatsuka, and what I'm about to show you isn't just analysis. It's the math of a trap that's already closed. Let me start with what 4 hours actually means when ballistic missiles are inbound, because the number sounds comfortable until you understand what has to happen in that window. You're not moving a few people to safety. You're trying to relocate personnel from barracks to hardened shelters built in the 1990s for a threat environment that no longer exists. You're dispersing aircraft that can taxi versus infrastructure that sits exactly where satellites photographed it yesterday. You're powering up Patriot batteries that need calibration time, integration time, network synchronization time, and you're doing all of this while trying not to show the enemy that you know they're coming. Because the moment your defensive posture changes, their targeting adjusts in real time. 4 hours isn't preparation time, it's the countdown to inadequacy, and that's assuming the intelligence window even opens. Because here's what the briefings don't emphasize enough. That 4-hour warning didn't come from the defense systems themselves. It came from intelligence intercepts, satellite imagery of launch preparations, signals analysis, the invisible architecture of surveillance that might give you hours or might give you nothing. The actual radar detection time for a medium-range ballistic missile crossing from Iranian territory to Gulf bases. 8 to 15 minutes from launch to impact. 8 minutes. That's the real number when intelligence fails or when Iran decides to launch cold, without the preparatory signatures American systems are trained to detect. What happens on that day? I'll tell you what happens. The same thing that happened at Tower 22 in January of last year when 3 American soldiers died because a single drone found a gap in the coverage of a small outpost in Jordan. That wasn't a ballistic missile. That was a commercially available drone platform with GPS guidance flown by an Iran-backed militia, and it killed 3 people and wounded over 40 before anyone could react. 3 families destroyed, 40 lives permanently altered, 1 drone. Now scale that to what Iran just demonstrated they can do with massed ballistic missile salvos, and you start to see the actual threat picture that nobody in Washington wants to discuss in front of cameras. Let me walk you through what happened during Iran's October strike on Israel, because the lessons apply directly to every American base in the region. Roughly 180 ballistic missiles launched. The combined defensive architecture of Israel and the United States, backed by Jordanian intercepts and regional partners engaged with everything available. Patriot batteries fired. THAAD systems engaged, Arrow 2, Arrow 3, David's Sling, all activated, SM-3 interceptors launched from destroyers in the eastern Mediterranean, the most advanced, most expensive, most layered missile defense network ever constructed, threw everything it had at that salvo, and missiles still landed. Satellite imagery confirmed impact craters at Nevatim Air Base. That's not speculation. That's verified strike data on a major Israeli military installation despite the full defensive response. The intercept rate was high, casualties were minimal, and officials called it a success. And by the standards of what could have happened, it was. But here's the part that should keep you awake. That success required the entire defensive capacity of 2 countries firing interceptors that cost $3 to $12 million each at missiles that cost Iran a fraction of that to build and launch. The cost-exchange ratio, the fundamental math of this kind of conflict, favors the attacker by margins that are economically unsustainable over time. This isn't theoretical economics. This is the algebra of attrition. Iran can build and launch cheap. America has to intercept expensive. Every engagement burns through stockpiles that take years to replace at production rates that don't match consumption rates. During the June conflict last year, reports indicated the United States expended over 150 THAAD interceptors in less than 2 weeks defending Israel. The entire global stockpile is estimated at around 650 rounds total. Do that math. One conflict, 2 weeks, 25% of the worldwide inventory consumed. And the replacement rate? 12 interceptors produced in all of fiscal year 2026 according to procurement data. And here's the strategic nightmare that nobody in the Pentagon wants to say out loud. Every THAAD interceptor burned over the Persian Gulf is one that can't sit in a magazine in the Pacific. Every Patriot round expended defending a base in Qatar is a round that won't be available for the scenario that every defense planner has been wargaming since 2020, Taiwan. China is watching this math in real time. They're watching American interceptor stockpiles drain defending against a mid-tier regional power, while the peer adversary conflict, the one that actually threatens American strategic interests, sits on the other side of the world with its own timeline. Beijing doesn't need to invade Taiwan tomorrow. They just need to wait until the missile defense cupboard is empty enough that the risk calculation shifts in their favor. That's not speculation. That's the second-order effect of sustained consumption in a theater that's bleeding resources away from the theater that actually matters. and the soldiers rotating through 12-month deployments in Iraq and Syria and Kuwait. They're the ones holding the bag for a strategic resource allocation problem that started long before they got their deployment orders. Now let's talk about the people nobody wants to discuss honestly. There are over 40,000 American service members deployed across the Middle East right now. Not all of them are on the big bases with the layered defenses and the billion-dollar air defense umbrellas. They're at outposts, forward operating locations, advisory positions in Iraq and Syria where the defensive architecture is thin to non-existent. These are the positions where the threat has outpaced the protection, where a 4-hour warning means nothing because there's nowhere hardened enough to go, where the decision-making happening in capitals thousands of miles away determines whether tonight is quiet or whether tonight the alarm is real and there's no THAAD battery to stop what's coming. I've spoken to veterans of these rotations, and the picture is consistent. Sustained alert cycles. Sleep broken by warnings that might indicate nothing or might indicate seconds to shelter. The cumulative psychological cost of deployments where you're not in active combat but you're never truly safe, where the randomness of drone strikes and rocket attacks creates a stress load that doesn't produce visible injuries but leaves damage that doesn't heal. The Department of Defense doesn't publish comprehensive mental health data on sustained high-threat deployments in the current environment, which should tell you something about what that data would show if they did. Here's what I want you to understand that almost no coverage is making clear. The threat environment has fundamentally changed faster than the systems protecting American forces have adapted. For 2 decades, the primary danger was asymmetric. IEDs, small arms, unguided rockets from militias. Dangerous but imprecise. Bases were built around that threat model. Concrete walls, hardened shelters, C-RAM systems designed for unguided projectiles. That world is gone. The militias have GPS-guided drones now, precision rockets. And in escalated scenarios, you have state-level ballistic missile strikes from Iranian territory traveling at speeds and trajectories that the base defenses were never engineered to handle. The infrastructure didn't evolve. The threat did. And that's not an accident. That's a procurement system that moves at the speed of congressional budget cycles, trying to counter threats that evolve at the speed of engineering innovation in countries that don't need committee approval to field new weapons. While American defense contractors were navigating multi-year development programs for incremental upgrades to existing systems, Iranian weapons engineers were iterating rapidly on drone platforms and precision guidance packages that cost a fraction as much and deployed years faster. The bureaucratic friction that's supposed to ensure accountability and prevent waste has instead created a capability gap that puts soldiers at risk. And here's what makes it worse. The people making budget decisions in Washington know this. There are classified assessments sitting in Pentagon archives right now that spell out exactly how wide the defensive gap is at forward operating locations across Iraq and Syria. Those assessments include recommendations for hardening upgrades, additional air defense deployments, base consolidations that would reduce exposure. Some of those recommendations are 5 years old. Most haven't been implemented because the political cost of base closures and the budget cost of comprehensive upgrades keep getting deferred to next year's problem, while this year's soldiers live with last decade's protection, and the people sitting inside that gap are American soldiers who didn't design the bases, didn't choose the deployment locations, and can't change the strategic decisions that put them there. They can only wait for the alarm, move to the shelter if there's time, and hope the intercept rate stays high enough that the odds don't catch them on the wrong night. Now let me tell you what we actually know versus what we're being told to assume. We know Iran can launch large-scale ballistic salvos. Verified. We know current missile defenses intercept most but not all incoming threats. Verified by impact evidence. We know the economic math of defense versus attack costs is unsustainable long-term. That's arithmetic, not analysis. We know American forces are deployed in locations where the protective gap is real and widening. Supported by incident data and expert assessment, what we don't know is how much further this escalates, and anyone selling you certainty on that question is lying. The situation involves multiple state actors, non-state proxies, competing interests, and a historical record of confident predictions about Middle East conflicts that have aged like milk. What serious analysts are saying, the ones not performing for cameras, is that the diplomatic window is still open but narrowing with every cycle of strike and counterstrike, that military escalation has its own momentum that becomes harder to reverse the longer it runs, and that the people paying the highest price, soldiers on the ground, civilians in affected regions, are never the people making the decisions. I'm not here to tell you the world is ending. I'm here to tell you what's actually happening in a theater where the defense math doesn't work. The protective infrastructure is a generation behind the threat, and 40,000 Americans are waiting to see whether the 4-hour warning they're promised will be there the next time it matters. That's not alarmism. That's the gap between what officials say in press conferences and what's real on the ground in a region where the escalation ladder has more rungs than anyone wants to count, and we're already several steps up. If you want analysis that acknowledges uncertainty instead of selling false confidence, you're in the right place. If you want someone to tell you everything's fine or everything's doomed, there are plenty of channels built for that. I deal in what's verified, what's probable, and what the data actually shows when you strip away the performance. Subscribe if that matters to you. I'm Kane Shimatsuka, and I'll see you in the next one.